Hey, this is Jody Roundhouse with the Roundhouse Report. This is part one of a little mini series. I'm going to be as quick as possible. Why did Germany lose World War II? Just look at it as a historian, as a military tactician, as a political scientist. Step out of World War II, look at the framework objectively. Why did Germany lose? I'm going to talk about that really quick. Some of the main reasons, just a bullet point. Okay. In 1939, Germany invaded and conquered Western Poland. They divided it up with Stalin's Russia, so each controlled half. In 1940, with Rommel, General Manstein, these types of guys, they were young, they fought during World War I. You realized how tanks should be utilized, and they officially spearheaded blitzkrieg tactics into Western Europe, and they literally conquered Europe in 3 weeks. All right, so come 1940, Germany had conquered Western Europe. They had left the English, they didn't finish them off, and they had not yet attacked Russia, but I believe they were in Africa at this point, just to set the groundwork. Now, they invaded Russia in 1941 under Hitler's orders. That was called Operation Barbarossa. It was not received well by the generals. And by the way, these are the very generals who were using the same innovative tactics, the same technologies, the general framework strategies that allowed them to conquer Europe in 3 weeks. They didn't like this timeline that Hitler had given them. And so these generals told Hitler, look, we're not prepared. We need about another year, and then we can invade Russia. So it's not like these generals were opposed to invading Russia. They just needed a little bit more time. Hitler said, no. And he immediately appointed himself the head of all military operations, both at the strategic and tactical levels. I believe that is, if not the reason, one of the top 3 reasons why Germany lost World War II. Hitler thought himself, at this point, he was drug-addled on methamphetamine, which the Germans invented, by the way. They invented methamphetamine. They used to give it to their troops, their SS divisions. He was jacked up on morphine and amphetamine. He was very irrational just from a drug-addled state. I got my notes here. Sometimes I refer back to them. I spilled some water on them. So I have some watermarks. That way no one can copy them. Okay. So Hitler appointed himself the head of everything. His generals were like, no, don't do this. Hitler would say, no, do it. And the generals were like, oh, fuck. All right, do it. And that's why they started losing. From 1942, 1943, they began losing. Really with the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad kind of marked the beginning of the end. Well, that's debatable. This, Hitler making himself the head of everything, of the military, together with him having survived more than 36, I know it's more than 30 assassination attempts, including a suitcase bomb, which I believe that's what the movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise is based on. A little suitcase bomb went off at Hitler's feet during a meeting, but part of the table blocked it, but it literally blew off Hitler's clothes. It literally blew his pants and his shoes off. But had he been assassinated, and the German military, rational actors who weren't drug-addled fanatical Nazis who wanted to kill people for no real reason, so they're not to be confused with the genocidal Nazis. A lot of these generals I'm mentioning, like Rommel, was disgusted when he came back from Africa and saw what was happening with these concentration camps. Rommel was disgusted, and that was one of the reasons why he was ultimately forced to kill himself by the Nazis. So one of the reasons why they did not prevail is because they didn't kill Hitler, which would lead to the German High Command assuming control, Rommel, Manstein, these kind of guys, establishing a Kaiser, negotiating some kind of a peace settlement. An assassination of a fanatical Hitler could have led to a ceasefire. It could have led to a whole, if you want to look at this from a more ideological level, Let me flip my notes. An assassination of Hitler would have led to, well, it would have led to a new German empire. Pre-World War I, it was the German Empire. They lost World War I, and it became the Weimar Republic in Germany. We being mostly France and Britain, tried to force democracy, aka the Weimar Republican, or the Weimar Republic on Germany during the 20s. That failed, led to the rise of Hitler ultimately. But that was the Weimar Republic, and then came the Third Reich. The Third Rule. Reich means empire, rule, or realm. The Third Reich under Hitler. Here are some reasons really quick. I'm going to try to be quick, bullet point, as to why they did not win. First of all, when they conquered Western Europe in 1940, Hitler began a sustained campaign against Great Britain proper, the actual island, north of the mainland of Europe. This was before he made himself commander of everything. The head of his Air Force, I forget his name, he knew what he was doing, so he was attacking the Royal Air Force. He was strictly attacking the Royal Air Force because once you establish air supremacy over England, you will ultimately win England, because then at that point the British Empire had a large naval. They had a large navy at that point. They were very powerful in a naval sense. Excuse me, not so much in a ground combat sense, but they had a powerful navy. So if the Germans had they established air supremacy over England and the English Channel by destroying the Royal Air Force, which they almost did, that would have led to a successful, because it would have been uncontested, invasion of England, which I believe was Operation Sea Lion. That was what it was codenamed, because Hitler really wanted to do this. But then guess what? About 90% of the Royal Air Force was destroyed. It looked like it was going to happen. But then Hitler decided this isn't going fast enough, and he launched the Battle of Britain. The Blitz of London. You should Google that. 40,000 civilians died in that, the Blitz of London. You should have finished off the Royal Air Force and established air supremacy, and it would have and then at that point destroyed the British Empire's navy in that entire sea region and in the Atlantic, in that entire region, leading to an uncontested, via sea or via air, an uncontested invasion of England proper. It would have only been contested by land. Number two, Malta, the island of Malta. If you want to Google map that really quick, southwest of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea. The island of Malta was not prioritized enough in terms of having command of it. Good grief, that was some kind of weird Freudian slip. The Germans, I have a lot of German Prussian heritage in me, so that's why I study this stuff. I find it interesting. That may be why I said we, because this is all based in Prussia, Prussian history. So number two, Malta was not prioritized enough. Malta's a little island in the Mediterranean, and the British Empire owned it. It's in between, Europe and Africa, like literally North Africa, where Rommel was operating successfully against the British Empire in North Africa with his African Corps. But they had a problem being resupplied because the Brits were launching air raids out of Malta and destroying the supply ships going from the mainland Europe into North Africa. So number two, Malta wasn't prioritized enough. They needed to capture that. And regarding that, allowances, why did Germany allow Dunkirk to happen? Over 200,000 fighting men were allowed to evacuate. Well, guess what? A few years later, Normandy, the D-Day invasions, those same dudes came back. Why did the German military allow them to evacuate like that? That I don't understand. Number three, Barbarossa, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, the one where Germany's generals were like, don't do this right now, and Hitler was like, no, we're going to do this anyway, and they launched it. It was launched too early, like I just said, against his general's advice. And again, these are the same guys who had conquered Europe in 3 weeks. You probably want to listen to them. They conquered Europe in 3 weeks, so they introduced a new type of warfare. Yeah, they literally rewrote the textbook on warfare. This is how we fight wars today. armored-based, tank maneuver-based warfare, fast-paced, fluid blitzkrieg. Let's look at the 2003 invasion of Iraq as a modern example. Hitler should have listened to his generals and waited a year. When Hitler assumed full control of all armed forces, and when he did launch his invasion in Russia, and it was going very well, but he was at the gates of Moscow, and suddenly, for freaking irrational reasons, just because he didn't like the name Stalingrad, because Stalin, who he hated, apparently, Stalin, he split the army that was meant to capture Moscow, and that was at the gates of Moscow. They're about to capture it. He splits it. He becomes irrationally obsessed with Stalingrad because of the name. And at this point, he's a freaking drug addict. So had he captured Moscow out the gate, like his generals wanted to, his eastern flank would have been secured, and then Russia would have been defeated. Number 4, the Enigma Code, the much vaunted code that was used by the German military throughout the war. The Germans always believed it to be uncrackable, and it was uncrackable until a German U-boat, a submarine. It was the Allies in the West in the Atlantic. I think the Americans did it. We sent some, we knew that there was a submarine in the area, a German sub, a U-boat, and we launched up some depth charges, which are really cool. If you want to Google a video of that, depth charges. We launched out some of those. We forced it to surface, and we just happened to find the Enigma code machine on that sub, and we cracked it. So that didn't help the Germans. Number 5, World War II German troops were not only considered renowned warriors on the battlefield, really good at what they did, which historically, that's what I mean, that goes back to Prussia. They always have been. They were also infamous for their rearguard actions during tactical retreats. And there's a big difference between a tactical and a strategic retreat. A strategic a strategic retreat is more like a rout. A tactical retreat is simply to pull your forces back based on the frontline commander's idea of what's going on. It's a very fluid situation. It's a battlefield. It's active. He sees what's going on. The enemy's circling. I'm going to pull these guys back tactically, redeploy, reposition, counteroffensive. Well, Hitler banned tactical retreats. He said, don't retreat. Fight till the last man. He's a freaking nut. The reason they lost is because of Hitler. Like I said, a tactical retreat is just redeployment in line with the needs of the frontline commanders. That was one thing that the New Age German military high command who had conquered Europe, Rommel, Manstein, etc., that was one thing that they're really good at is they fought at the front lines and they had really good communications between integrated military communications, again, modern warfare, between air and land. So they're really good at being able to call in kinetic strikes on a fluid battlefield. But many of these frontline field commanders, they refused in the end to obey, and they would retreat tactically to set the groundwork for a counteroffensive. Now here's a quote, and I don't remember where I got this quote from. Even in retreat, the Germans still inflicted massive damage, end quote. So even in retreat, I'm going to do a quick, let's say there's a 200,000 man German army. The commander of that army wants to do a tactical retreat 20 miles back. He doesn't want his dudes to get slaughtered as they're retreating, so he leaves, out of those 200,000, he leaves 10,000 men behind, German soldiers, to do rearguard actions to stall the advancing Soviet army, for instance. Let's say the Soviet army is 200,000 strong as well. So 190,000 German troops begin to tactically retreat. Meanwhile, those 10,000 rearguard troops, they were so good that they would hold down that 200,000 man Soviet army for like a week, because they would do hit and run, and they kind of wrote the textbook on that. They were notorious. They didn't, because they would hold you up for so long, and not only would they hold you up, but they would maul. They would maul you up. They would hold you up and they would maul you up. But once again, against his general's advice, this is number 6 as to why they lost the war in general. conceptually. Once again, against his general's advice, Hitler launched a last-ditch attempt to destroy the Western Front, led by America, England, and Canada, and then other exiled nations who had small military contingents, like the Free French and everything, the Polish. Hitler, against his general's advice, launched the last-ditch effort to defeat the Western Front by capturing the port of Antwerp, which would have cut off Allied supply lines. Had he won, it would have done a lot of damage to us. It led into the Battle of the Bulge. Have you heard of the Battle of the Bulge? He wasted a 250,000-man army in the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler wasted a 250,000-man army that consisted of many elements of that army consisted of fanatical SS divisions, heavy armored SS divisions, which were much feared by the American and English and Canadian contingents. These guys were Nazis, fanatical Nazis, a lot of them. A lot of them were battle-hardened veterans from the Eastern Front, which is brutal. Fighting the Soviets was brutal. They were pulled out into the Western Front. You had these guys. You had the best tanks that Germany developed in the war. They developed in the latter stages of the war, so too few, too late, and they were expensive. And I'm talking about the Panther II, the Tiger, the King Tiger tank. These are really, really good tanks, but again, too few, too late. Imagine had Germany used those 250,000 crack troops and equipment, which was the last thing standing between the Western Allies and Berlin. That was like all Hitler had left on the Western Front to protect Germany from the advancing Allied armies. Imagine how much more damage Germany would have inflicted on the Americans, the English, the Canadians, etc., as they advanced, had he saved those 250,000 men to use as essentially a rearguard force. If a 10,000-man German rearguard force can inflict that much damage, imagine a 250,000-man rearguard German defense force consisting of those crack troops and the best material that I just mentioned. At this point, pre-Battle of the Bulge, this is what I think should have happened. Pre-Battle of the Bulge, while Germany's military was still formidable, it hadn't been destroyed yet, Hitler should have been assassinated, and a rational military high command should have taken over. The Kaiser reinstituted, the evil, unneeded genocides would have been stopped, and they would have settled peace. They would have lost territory, but they also would have gained territory. This would have led to Germany remaining the German Empire. But now it would be, I guess, the Fourth Reich. And it would, to this day, remain a strong anchor from the 1940s on, a strong anchor to stabilize and to balance other European nations. And it would have to have been led by a capable, rational, talented leader, a Kaiser, a rational actor who knows what he's doing, and keeps that old school, historical Prussian emphasis on the military. Authoritative, yes. Fascist, okay, semi-fascist, all right. No genocide, no evil crap. Europe, led by capable, rational, talented Kaisers. What would today's Europe look like? Today's Europe's on fire. I made a video about that. What would today's Europe look like had the scenario that I just laid out, have Germany won World War II? What would today's Europe, April 9th, 2019, what would Europe look like? You have the Yellow Vests protesting, you have neo-Nazis protesting in Germany, you have far-right governments being voted into different provinces throughout Germany, you have a nationalistic government that just took control in Italy and is refusing to bring in migrants. You have a lot of nationalism that is rising and bubbling and boiling up, especially obviously in Europe, but also in the northern Scandinavian states, Sweden, Norway, etc., very liberal. This is just part one. If you like what you see, please subscribe and please hit me up. This is Jody Roundhouse at the Roundhouse Report, part one of why Germany lost World War II. Oh, all right.